one thing the Germans weren't able to shave off was my integrity. And that, I think, really helped me to survive and come out a human being.
Lydia, you grew up in Czechoslovakia, and after occupation of the country by the Nazis, you were sent to several concentration camps, Terezín, about 30 miles north of Prague, and notably Auschwitz in Poland as well. What was that like, walking into Auschwitz?
Indescribable, really. You had to walk past Mengele, Dr. Mengele, who sorted you out whether you went to the left to stay alive or whether you went straight.
This is the
to
physician,
the gas chambers,
isn't it? Who
yes.
left or right,
Left
alive
or
or
right.
dead. Yeah.
Yes, and because I was wearing a couple of coats and I looked rather big, he looked at me and said, stark wie ein Pferd, which means strong as a horse, and sent me luckily to the left.
You're talking, of course, about Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death. He was the German physician who performed deadly experiments on prisoners, and
Yes.
he was one of the people to decide whether your
Yes.
fate would be the gas chamber or not.
He was the person. Yes,
So you encountered him,
yes.
and what did he say in your direction?
He said, he looked at me and said, stark wie ein Pferd, which means strong as a horse, and sent me to the left. All transports arrived in the middle of the night, so it was dark and there were only the big lights, the spotlights, and of course the dogs and the electrified barbed wire. So everything was conducive to really make you terrified.
Can you remember how you felt, how you assessed the situation?
Well, there was no assessing to be done, there was just a sort of surviving it. As it happened, my mother and my sister were sent into the transport, although I discovered years later that in fact my mother volunteered to go with my sister because she was the only one who was in the transport. I volunteered also to go, not quite knowing what I was going to. We were not allowed to, we were told all the time, well, we can't take you. There were quite a few of us who had family members who wanted to be with the family. In the end, they had an extra wagon, so they let us go. So by the time I got into the train, my mother and sister were already locked up in their carriage, so that my mother didn't even know that I came to Auschwitz.
That you were also going to Auschwitz?
Because she was sent straight to the right. When my sister met me there, she nearly had a heart attack because she thought I was safely in Terezín, and there I suddenly appeared. And then the dehumanization began. First of all, you had to take off all your clothes. So they say ausziehen, which means get undressed. So you take off your coat, they go on, get undressed, until you are totally naked. Then the kapos, the prisoners who'd been there for a time, came with their razors and shaved off all your hair everywhere, so that you were really totally naked and bald, and you were thrown some sort of rags, clothes. I was given a sort of silky summer dress, and that was November. I was pretty cold. We were there for 3 days, and after 3 days we were sent to a work camp in Germany, my sister and I, and about 300 Czech women and about 200 Polish women. We were sent to
And your mum
in
didn't make it
Germany.
out of Auschwitz?
No,
You didn't see your mum?
no, and she didn't see me, no, no. Or my sister knew, yeah. But we were told straight away by the car post, look, anybody who went to the right went straight to the gas chambers.
You were sent to a work camp. Was it there that you began to take an interest in children younger than you? Perhaps
No,
No.
not then. And then I became an adept at using a pneumatic drill. I knew how to use a crumpatch. I can't think of the English word now. We were to some of us among the girls were laying a cable, were digging a trench to lay a cable from one factory to another. They were converting the weaving factories into munitions factories, and we were doing the work of digging up the road to lay the cable. So as I say, I became quite a dab hand with the pneumatic drill. Because we were doing this work, we got an extra slice of bread and bowl of soup in the middle of the day. I mean, hunger was permanent. You know, one was permanently hungry, not starving, but hungry.
And how long were you in those conditions for?
6 months from end of November. From November until April, when the Americans were advancing. We were near Dresden. The camp was near Dresden, and as the Americans were advancing, the Germans were evacuating all the camps, so we were loaded into cattle trucks. Luckily the weather was really quite summery. We were in open cattle trucks. I remember I got quite sunburned sitting in these open cattle trucks, and we were transported back to Terezin. And in Terezin, on the 8th of May, the Russians liberated us on the way to Prague. So that's where I ended the war.
And your interest, whether you knew it at the time, in offering counsel to younger children, your interest in observing children. I mean, you were just a child yourself. Where did that stem from?
Well,
did that happen during that time?
That happened from Terezin. I was told about, there was a Czech philanthropist. He was a Czech Brethren, which is about equivalent to the Plymouth Brethren, a religious sect. But he had already worked with delinquent boys before the war, and he commandeered some lorries and German villas that the Germans had run away from. And he collected orphans in Terezin and brought them to this place called Oleszowicz. And I heard about him. I heard about this place, and I decided, a friend of mine also, we decided to go. And that's when I started looking after these orphans. And that's where my interest in working with children really began.
Your father had made it to England.
That's right, yes.
And in 1945, at 16,
yes,
you came to England to join him and to finish your studies.
yes,
You were one of the first people in England to work in child psychotherapy with Anna Freud.
not quite one of the perhaps the third or
The
I
early.
was about the third or fourth intake, yes.
So
Yes, but fairly early on.
fairly
yes.
early on.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, when I came to England, as I say, I came with the idea that I would work with children, but I really had no idea how I would do it or what I would do. First of all, I had to catch up on 4 years of schooling, and we lived in Kilburn, and I used to see girls walking about with those school hats. So I thought, well, there must be a school there. So I walked around the corner, and as it happened, I walked into the school the day before the winter term started, and the secretary was there, and I just said, I'd like to come and join your school. So she told me to come the next day when all the teachers were there, and they did a kind of assessment of what I knew and what I didn't know, and accordingly they put me in different classes. So I was there for about 18 months.
Had you been heavily affected by your experiences through wartime? How did you deal with that as a child?
Well, actually, I think, of course, I was affected, but we luckily and unluckily, we humans managed to cope with very distressing situations with shutting them off. In order to survive, you really don't allow yourself to feel what you should really be feeling, because that would do you in. So I managed somehow to, I think I described it once that one thing the Germans weren't able to shave off was my integrity. And that, I think, really helped me to survive and come out a human being. But you were asking me how I got to Anna Freud. During the war, I was in a Jewish orphanage, not because I was an orphan, but because my mother had no means of supporting us. And it was really a very enlightened children's home. And there was another girl there called Anna then Furman. And it was through her that I got to this home in Auschwitz. And she came to England a year after me. She had already worked with the children in Terezin. She was older, she was 2.5 years older than I. And through her, I got a job in a residential nursery in England for children who weren't able to go home after, because
Is this
of
the Hampstead War Nursery, which Anna Freud had set up, something different?
No, it wasn't. It was something, something set up. The Hampstead War Nurseries were during the war.
Okay.
And I wasn't here. It was something set up by the Association for Mental Health, and Ruth Thomas, who became my tutor, who was at that time already in analysis with Anna Freud, was director of this home. And so I then applied for a job as an unqualified nurse, and I worked with these rather disturbed children. It was a residential nursery, and she really introduced us to psychoanalytic concepts of child development, and this was the first step to getting to Anna Freud. I then had to get a degree in psychology in order to be accepted, which I did at Birkbeck College, because I had to also earn a living, so I worked as an unqualified teacher and studied in the evening, and then I was accepted when I did that, I was accepted for the Anna Freud training.
So this was at the centre, and do correct me if I'm wrong, the Hampstead Child and Therapy course and clinic.
Yes.
You were based there, and that clinic then became the Anna Freud Centre, which many of our listeners will know of.
It became the Anna Freud Centre after she died.
After she died, in memoriam. And of course you were being trained there. they've specialised in treatment and research in child psychoanalysis.
Yes.
How many of those were groundbreaking new concepts at the time? Paint a picture of what people were starting to understand about children.
I think one of the things that, of course, the war had, started was the effect of separation for mothers and children. And that was, of course, Anna Freud's big contribution, that she tried at the Hampstead War nurseries. She allowed the parents as much access as they could have, because the effects of early separation can be lifelong. So that was one of the groundbreaking things. The other was that children go through different stages of development. That was very much Anna Freud's idea. And also the idea that one took children seriously. That you didn't talk down to them, and that you actually listened to children, and that their fantasies had meaning. It wasn't just, it's a childish thing. So that's one of the things that I learned, was to take children seriously, to listen to them, and not to talk down to them.
You were the first child psychotherapist at the Castle Hospital in Richmond, where I gather mothers suffering with mental illness and their babies were treated, and you transformed the treatment at the centre by establishing a family unit.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, the idea that was Dr. Main, who was the medical director, and he was a psychoanalyst, he admitted really against a lot of critical opposition. He admitted mothers who'd had a purple breakdown with their infants. And his reasoning, quite rightly, was that in fact the infant, the baby, was the symptom. The mother broke down as a result of having a baby. So in a way, to admit the mother without the symptom would make it much more difficult to treat her. But his idea was, yes, and sometimes mothers already had older children, so he admitted the older children as well.
And the fathers, were they
Fathers
then
were visitors, they
Mm.
could visit at that stage, but it was important for the mother to actually understand what it was that made her not like her baby, or made her even think that the baby hated her.
You must have really saved so many children from having to go into care through your work there.
Yes, I think that did save children from going into care, yes. But it was the older children who didn't have any, as it were, the nurses were doing something with, they had a play group and they played, but there was no professional help or oversight of the older children who were in hospital with their mothers. And it was as a result of the appointment of Dr. Tischler, then my colleague, and myself.
Who was your husband eventually?
He was the child psychiatrist and I was the first child psychotherapist, to assess to what extent the older children were damaged by their mother's problems. And that evolved then eventually into a family unit where we admitted the whole family, and also where the child was the patient and brought the mother in.
Yeah.
So this was the work that Dr. Salo and I developed, and he left very shortly. He wasn't there for a long time, but I really then developed the unit, and employed other child therapists, and it became quite a thriving family unit, yes.
You're 93.
4,
94. You're 94 and still teaching
yes,
on the UCL Child and Adolescent Psychotherapy Doctorate Programme,
yes.
which is incredible. How much or how many of the principles that you learned 60 odd years ago still remain in place today, and has there been any significant changes?
Well, there have been changes in theory and development, but as far as I'm concerned, I had such a thorough grounding. I think that there was no better training in child analysis than that Anna Freud provided. I'm still nourished by it. I still draw on what I learned 70 years ago.
Do you think you'll carry on teaching for as long as you can?
Well, as long as, yes, firstly it gives me something to do. It keeps my brain occupied, so that, otherwise I would just sit at home and knit and watch television, and that is not conducive to mental health. Yeah.
You will have worked with children experiencing post-war trauma. Have the challenges that children face changed when we talk about trauma, or we talk about either or, kids in general, and the sort of challenges that they face now compared to that time?
Yes, I think the population that gets referred to camps, to child mental health teams, has changed considerably. It's very rare that you get a child who has an internal conflict, who has got phobias or things that are resulting from an internal problem. Today, I think mainly because of the way that families have disintegrated to an extent, that there are so many single parent families, either through divorce or not so much death, but very often because of a mother's choice. There is an absence of a paternal authority, and that has resulted, I think, in children not having they don't have the boundaries that children in the past had.
Would that have been a problem after that post-war period as well?
No,
with
the
fathers not necessarily coming home
would have been more a problem due to separation. But this is really a problem that the children don't really learn proper impulse control. Whatever they feel, they act out. Everything goes. There are no proper, to call it good behavior makes it a moral concept. What I mean is acceptable behavior. And many of the children who come into therapy now are those with these kind of acting out problems. They are, in kind of ordinary parlance, we would say, they are behaving badly. They are behaving badly.
There's a lack of a filter there.
But they are behaving badly for a reason. It's not just that they are naughty, but they are naughty because they don't know anything better. So that the population that gets referred has altered considerably.
You've just won the Times Sternberg Active Life Award, which is part of the reason why we're speaking to you today. It celebrates outstanding achievement by people over the age of 70, and you clear that marker by quite some way. Looking back on your career, what are you most satisfied about? What are you most pleased with when you think about your contribution to the lives of the children who you've worked with?
Well, I tell you, the thing that I feel most proud of is having helped to set up a training in the Czech Republic. I was invited to set up a child training there, and that's flourishing and it's going strong. That I'm very pleased and proud of. I also did some teaching in Russia. In fact, I still supervise therapists who were on Zoom, who work in Russia. And I think more my, I think I was for many years the first port of call for people who wanted to train as child therapists. And I think I had a way of helping them to accept that, to help them into the training.
To
and
encourage
I
them.
think, yes, I think that I would say that's my strength.
Well, look, it's been such a delight to speak to you today, and we've been hugely honoured to have you here at Times Radio as well, for a televised interview as well. People will be able to hear this and also see it as well. And thank you so much for speaking to us today on the show. Lydia Tischler, thank you.
You're welcome.